Hey there, Reconciled Church. Pastor Kevin here, back with another installment in our video series, Why Do We Do That? Where we take some aspect of our church, kind of part of our culture, and unpack it. Why do we do this? Why is some of the things we do are maybe a little weird to you? Why do we do this other than we're just a bunch of weirdos? So, this week's issue looks at the idea of kids in service, or to phrase it like a question, why do we have kids in our worship service? Now, depending on your background in church, you maybe have saw you grew up in an environment where kids were literally always in the worship service, which is awesome. I'm totally okay with that. Or maybe you came from a background where kids were literally put in a different like kind of Bible study or had their own kind of kids worship service. Sometimes all the people will do that all the way through high school, which I'm not cool with. But what we do at Reconciled Churches, we have daycare, basically like a kid child care for toddlers, and it goes all. And then when they get to about pre-K age, so about 4 years old, three and a half, 4 years old, we do offer a Bible study for them during the sermon on Sunday morning. And then by the time they hit about the third grade, so like 8 years old, our goal is to have them be a part of our worship service, same as all the adults in the room. Okay, now we welcome kids, by the way, of any age in there. So like if you want your 3-year-old, 4-year-old to sit with you in church, God bless, that's awesome, no problem with that. To be honest with you, some of those little ones who are in our service sit quietly and listen as good as any adult in that service. And we also don't mind babies in our service. So we offer childcare. We do not require childcare. That's important to understand. Now, for some people, this is weird. And they're like, man, I wish you guys had more kids programs on Sunday during the service. Now, why don't we do this? Well, first, let's acknowledge the fact that historically, families have been with each other on Sunday mornings during worship. So there is historical precedent for what we're doing here. It's actually the idea of like, oh, we need like a separate kids church. That's a modern development. So that's first to understand, is that the idea of having kids in church is the standard. It's as opposed to, or it's the norm. And it's the idea of, well, kids always need their own little service or whatever, that is kind of the novel new thing that people are trying in our modern age. Now, a couple questions arise when we talk about why we move kids into service and allow kids at service at all ages, but also try to move our kids into service sooner rather than later. People might say, well, don't kids need to learn at their own level? And I'm sympathetic toward this. I was a school teacher. I'm a dad with 3 kids, okay? I want my kids to understand the message of the gospel. I want them to understand it in such a way that they actually want to trust Jesus and follow him with their lives. So I'm not unsympathetic to this. And yeah, there's certainly a benefit of age-appropriate lessons, no doubt. However, I think there's some flaws in this thinking too, and I kind of want to unpack some of them. First, it ignores the benefit of what kids learn by seeing their parents do. Okay, so basically this idea only thinks in terms of what kids are explicitly told, and it's like, oh, well, they'll understand more if they're told at an appropriate level, and there's probably some truth to that. However, any parent will tell you your kids are learning more than just by what you say. They're also learning by what they see you do. So one of the things kids generally do is they take after their parents. You'll hear my kids use turns of phrases they hear me and their mother use around the house and stuff. In a lot of ways, kids are a reflection of their parents. And so we see that there's a benefit in kids not only learning from like in terms of what they can understand, but also simply experiencing the worship service by seeing what their parents do. So one of the things you'll notice that I do is I take my middle kid, Killian, out into service from his Bible study when we take the Lord's Supper. He's 5 years old, and he hasn't made a profession of faith. He hasn't been baptized, so he's not taking the Lord's Supper, but he does see us do this. And there's a specific reason I do this. I let him come out one time because his sister has made a profession of faith. She's been baptized, and so she takes the Lord's Supper with us. And he wanted to come out with and do this and see what his older sister was doing. So he said, yeah, come on. You can sit with us as long as you sit quietly and everything. And he did. And we had probably some of the most interesting and useful conversation after church we've ever had about that. He started asking, like, well, why do we do that with the bread and the juice? And why can't I take the bread and the juice? And all this opened up opportunities to share the gospel with him more clearly. Well, Killian, we believe that people take communion to remember Jesus' sacrifice in our place. And until you've trusted in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and made that faith known by being baptized, we ask for you to refrain from taking. We hold back to taking that. And obviously, then he's like, "Well, I want to do that." And I'm like, "Well, tell me why do you want to do that stuff?" And I want to see how much of the gospel he can actually kind of tell me back to me. And so it's just some awesome conversation. And I'm like, okay, I want more conversations like that all the time. Nothing against our kids program. I think our kids program is really great. But I've never had a conversation with my son about faith as much as after he saw us take the Lord's Supper. Why? Because he's learning just by watching mom and dad worship. Now, parents, just remember this. Our kids are watching what we do, and they're learning from it as much as what they're hearing us tell them what to do. So that's one problem with the idea of simply assuming kids need to learn at their level. Second, it assumes that people learn completely at a specific level. It thinks in terms of like really very clear levels of learning and things like that. Guys, let me tell you something. There are plenty of adults in our worship services that don't understand everything I say. Sometimes they're probably members of my own family. But the point is, and same thing's true for me. I don't retain and remember and understand necessarily 100% of every sermon I ever hear. The point is, most of you, including myself, learn something from Sunday mornings, and that's enough. And you grow in your knowledge through that. And then some things have to be repeated over and over again. There's a reason I stop and I go, hey, here's the big idea. So if you're going to write down a note, if you're going to commit anything to memory, remember this. Understanding with that is that you're probably not going to remember every other thing I say. It doesn't mean you're going to forget everything else I say, but this is the thing I want to stick in your brain. So understand that kids, that no one learns exactly at a clear level, or no one retains 100% of everything they learn. When you do, I've done some deep dive research on kids and worship services and stuff. I've read a couple books about it, especially when I was a youth pastor. So if you have any book recommendations, I can give you some. But probably one of the most frequently cited studies is one that was conducted by a guy named Christian Smith in 2004. It's the National Study on Youth and Religion. And basically, it's like probably the most biggest study on spirituality in teenagers and into adulthood that's ever been conducted. So if you want to know more about that, the works were published in a book, Soul Searching: The Religious and Spiritual Lives of American Teenagers. And like I said, if you read books on kind of child development in their teens, you're going to see this study mentioned over and over again. I keep seeing it pop up in different books. But to cite a few of the highlights, some of the things they found from their study, a couple things that they found is that kids generally take after the religion of their parents. Even in our modern post-Christian society, whatever, kids generally still take after the religion they get from their parents. And the study also found that the greatest factor on whether or not kids would follow Jesus later in life, one of the biggest correlation they could find is whether or not their parents were involved. This is important because, like I said, your kids, if they're learning more from you than they are from me on their spirituality, that means them seeing you practice your faith is super crucial. Not only that, the study led to the development of a somewhat popular phrase about American religion, the term moralistic therapeutic deism. Basically, what they're saying is that most people they found in America profess what they would call moralistic therapeutic deism, which you may not understand, you may not use this concept, but you know a million people who hold this idea. Basically, it goes like this: be a nice person, God doesn't care about the details, he just wants you to feel good. That's what most people, regardless of denomination, tend to believe in America. So, guys, just understand there's never been age specific teaching. There's never been as much age specific teaching in the church as there is now. We have more segmented teaching in the church than we ever have before. We have more age specific curriculum in the church as we ever have before. But the funny thing is, kids are leaving the church at a higher rate than they did when we didn't have all these fancy bells and whistles. Okay? Don't get me wrong, I like age-appropriate kids programs, but they should always supplement what we do on a Sunday gathering, not replace it, okay? But then some might say, well, Kev, we just need a break. Like, life is hard, kids are exhausting. Can't I just drop off my kids on a Sunday morning, go eat my donut, drink my coffee, sing my songs, pray my prayers, hear the sermon, and then go on my merry way, and then go back to parenting right after that, after about 90 minutes. And look, I hear you. I mean, look, I'm a parent, and my kids are not perfect little angels. They exhaust me a lot. And I get it. You know, it's the Sabbath, so shouldn't it be restful? You're not wrong. But let me suggest that the process of training your kids to sit and listen to a message in church may be difficult on the front end, but it pays off a whole lot on the back end. All right? So it not only is it useful in church, so you want your kids to learn how to sit through a sermon in church, but it helps out in the rest of society. So do you ever want to be able to take your kids to a restaurant and have them be able to sit still while you eat your meal, enjoy the company, rather than kind of swinging like monkeys from the overhead lighting? Well, in that case, training them to sit in church is actually a great start. It'll pay off elsewhere. Look, sitting and paying attention for a short period of time is just a life skill everyone needs to learn. In classes, they'll need to sit for far longer periods of time than they do through my sermons. Trust me, I'm not that long. So it benefits them to cultivate this skill sooner rather than later in life. The sooner you start this training, the more you'll be glad you did it. I promise you this. And I get it that moms and dads need a break. Here's my suggestion. Get a babysitter. Have a date night. Go see a movie. All that good stuff. Corporate worship isn't something we should simply use for free daycare. You guys need to hear this. You can do it. You may not feel like you can do it, but trust me, if you are a parent out there, you can train your kids to be an active participant in the worship service. Like I said, the goal isn't that they sit around for 75, 90 minutes on a Sunday morning like absolutely quiet. We stand, we sing, we pray prayers, we take the Lord's Supper. The sermon itself, where there's actually sitting and listening for an extended period of time, guys, I generally preach between 30, 35 minutes. It's not that crazy long. They watch shows that are longer than that. And chances are, if they're older, they certainly spend more time in front of a screen than that. So, also what goes along with this is that there needs to be a lot of grace in our church in regards to kids in service. Part of our commitment to see the next generation discipled means we don't leer, jeer, or sneer at kids or parents in service when a baby cries or a kid needs to be corrected. Guys, if you grew up in church, you were one of those kids at some point in time. You were a crying baby, or maybe a kid who had to be taken aside for a minute to get lectured to. Lord knows I was. Point is, we are all in this together, and it's okay that things don't work perfectly. All right, we're not, the goal of our church is not to simply be hold a perfect service. All We're a family. All right, so we accept that stuff with a lot of grace. But then you might ask, well, with all that said, why then do we have a kids program? Like, why not just put all kids of all ages into our service? And that's an option. And like I said, I don't necessarily bemoan churches that do that. What I think of our Reconciled Kids program as is more like a co-op program. If you have ever been a part of like a co-op, the idea is that some parents and maybe some extra volunteers say that they are willing to watch and help teach not only their own child or children, but other people's child and children once a month. And the idea is that they kind of trade responsibilities. The idea is you can sit through a sermon for the sermon 3 times a month if you'll watch the kids and teach them Bible once a month. And I think that's a good process. If we ran out of volunteers, if we ran out of parents who are willing to do that, guys, we just move the kids back into service. That's fine. I would rather have that, by the way, than have like a few people always miss out on service. Okay, I don't want this is why I always say, like, it's a 1 weekend a month kind of thing. I don't want anyone back there 3-4 times a month. I want them to be in our service. But I get it, like, kids at a certain age, it's helpful. 1, we want to train them to be a part of our service, and 2, I get it that it's helpful. And so if, X amount of parents kind of partner together so that with the understanding that, like, hey, I'm going to have to stream the service once a month, but I'm going to be able to kind of sit and watch it generally uninterrupted for a little while, that's cool too. Also, I'm super okay with offering, and I'm all for offering other Bible studies outside of our Sunday service time. Things like Sunday schools, Wednesday night programs, things like that. Like, one of the things is you'll notice with our kids is right now, like, the bulk of our kids are kind of at that, like, just about like, 6 and younger range. There's some olders. We got some teenagers. We got some like older elementary now in service. But one of the things with that is, like, I think we should be offering other options as kids develop and as the need arises. So I'm already thinking of the process of what to do, ways to help teach our older elementary kids, to kind of help supplement some of what we do so they do get some age-specific teaching, and we will probably do that stuff with youth as well in the future. So stay tuned for that. But then my last reason for this is, as a parent, I consider the risks involved. So, like, what would be lost if we did or didn't do it this way? Now, if you think about it this way, let's assume that I'm wrong and that age-appropriate learning is the most important thing for a kid to get in church. Well, I can think of a million different ways to offset it. Like I said, Sunday schools before or after service, Wednesday night programs, all that good stuff. Sunday night programs, whatever. I'm not saying we're going to do all of those things, but what I am saying is I can think of other ways to offset that. However, if the most important thing for your kid's development is seeing mom and dad worship, I have no solutions for that other than to have your kids be a part of service. Okay, it's the same thing for my kids. If that is going to make the most profound effect on my kids, then I want my kids to be a part of that. And this kind of gets back to the last reason, which, as a pastor, a parent, and a Christian, I can't in good conscience recommend something that I wouldn't practice with my own family. I would not send my kids to away from church and into Bible study all the way through elementary school or through junior high or high school or anything like that. So why on earth I would be a bad friend, pastor, whatever, to tell you to do the opposite of what I would do with my children? Okay. And so I'm not comfortable sending my own kids away once I know they can sit and pay attention during service. I want to raise them up so they can be active participants in it. So like I said, why would I recommend parents do something contrary to what I believe is most beneficial for my own child's growing faith? So that's why, as a church, we make it our goal to train up kids and to move them into being active participants in the worship service sooner rather than later. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. This is all I got for this week. Love you guys. God bless.